Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. The Prime Minister has held a high-level review of the ongoing border standoff along the line of actual control with China. He has met with senior officials from the security and defense establishment, including the National Security Advisor, the Chief of Defense Staff, and the service chiefs of the three armed forces, and has taken stock of the situation as tensions continue to increase between the two countries. We have been discussing over the last few days that a border standoff has emerged between the Indian Army and the Chinese PLA at various points in Ladakh, including the Panong So Lake area in Ladakh and the Nakula Pass in Sikkim. According to reports, both the countries have deployed their troops into forward areas following this border standoff, and this has led to increased tensions. As per existing de-escalation mechanisms under established protocols and agreements, talks have been held at the level of local commanders, including at the level of divisional commanders, in order to resolve the crisis. But these talks have failed to break the impasse, and the increasing tensions mark the first major border dispute between India and China after the Doklam dispute of 2017. So in order to take stock of the situation, the Prime Minister has held a high-level review meeting with senior officials from the security and defense establishment, including the NSA, the Chief of Defense Staff, and the three service chiefs of the three armed forces. Strategic experts have attributed these border incursions to China's opposition to increased capabilities of India at the border. Reportedly, China has objected to India's construction activities in the border areas, leading to the current standoff. India's response to this crisis has been quite muted, and it has refrained from making any public statements which could unnecessarily escalate the crisis. According to reports, the government of India has been working in the background and making use of diplomatic channels and established protocols in order to resolve the crisis. But in contrast, China has publicly chosen to blame India, and it has blamed India for attempting to unilaterally change the status quo at the border. Apart from the Prime Minister, even the Defense Minister has held a review with senior officials from the Ministry of Defense and the three service chiefs in order to discuss the current situation along the line of actual control. Apart from taking stock of the developments along the India-China border, the Defense Minister has also reviewed the implementation of the recommendations of the Shekatkar Committee. The Shekatkar Committee was set up by former Defense Minister Manohar Parrikar, and it had submitted a number of key recommendations pertaining to defense reforms in 2016. The recommendations of the Shekatkar Committee are related to making the armed forces more leaner, cohesive, and modern. Over the last few years, the Government of India has approved the implementation of a few recommendations of the Shekatkar Committee in order to modernize the armed forces and introduce defense reforms. But apart from these few approved recommendations, the rest of the recommendations of the Shekatkar Committee are still classified, and they are not available in the public domain because they deal with certain operational aspects of the armed forces. Here are some of the accepted recommendations of the Shekatkar Committee that are available in the public domain. This includes the speeding up of road construction activities along the border areas, outsourcing road construction work beyond the optimal capacity of the border roads organization, the mandatory adoption of engineering procurement contract for execution of all projects that cost more than 100 crore rupees, delegation of enhanced procurement powers to the border roads organization for domestic and foreign procurements, the inclusion of all clearances related to land acquisition, including forest and environmental clearance, as a part of the DPR or the detailed project report. So some of these specific recommendations that intend to speed up the creation of road infrastructure along the border areas have been accepted, and they are currently being implemented. Few of the other recommendations which have been approved, they are not available in the public domain as they deal with the operational aspects of the armed forces. These are some of the other recommendations of the Shekatkar Committee that are currently being considered and is in the process of being implemented. These recommendations are related to the optimization and modernization of various defense units, defense manufacturing workshops, ordnance depots, etc. The other key reforms recommended by the Shekatkar Committee include the enhancement of India's defense budget to 2.5 to 3% of India's GDP in order to make the armed forces capable of dealing with the threats that lie ahead. It has also recommended the establishment of a joint services war college for training middle-level officers along with the conversion of the Military Intelligence School at Pune into a tri-service intelligence training establishment in order to streamline intelligence reforms and training within the armed forces. Next, on page number 14, we have an article which helps us understand the mindset and the thinking of China's strategic and military establishment. According to this article, China's President Xi Jinping has urged the People's Liberation Army to scale up its battle preparedness and plan for the worst case scenarios, because according to China, the pandemic is having a profound impact on the global landscape and global geopolitics, which could in turn affect China's security and development. So this in a way helps us understand the mindset and thinking of China's strategic and military establishment, and it also offers a reason as to why China's aggression and assertiveness has increased considerably during the pandemic. See, it is not just with India that tensions have increased as a result of Chinese aggression. The same can be seen with regard to Taiwan, Hong Kong, and as well as the South China Sea. Over the last few months, China has become increasingly assertive with Taiwan, and it had aggressively tried to prevent Taiwan's entry into the World Health Organization as an observer. Then in Hong Kong, China used the pandemic as an excuse, and it broke up the pro-democracy protests that were going on since the last year with the use of force. Recently, China has proposed the introduction of a controversial legislation in its parliament, which would allow the Chinese government to draft national security laws that would apply for Hong Kong as well. Then in the South China Sea as well, the Chinese PLA's navy has stepped up its military aggression in order to assert its claims over the disputed islands. Strategic experts believe that China's aggression in the neighborhood against India, against Southeast Asian countries, and as well as in Taiwan and Hong Kong could be a direct result of increasing isolation of China during the pandemic. The global community, especially the Western countries led by the United States, have blamed China for the pandemic, and they have held China to be directly responsible. Along with this, China's increasing trade wars, especially with the United States, and increasing diplomatic tensions with the US, might be pushing China to step up aggression in the neighborhood in order to create a diversion. Now let's take up another article from page number 1, which deals with the controversial drug hydroxychloroquine. See, we have discussed this topic in detail on the 8th of April, but today we shall discuss a few new developments related to hydroxychloroquine. See, hydroxychloroquine is a very popular anti-malarial drug, and of late it has gained a lot of significance because it has been labeled as a potential cure for COVID-19. In fact, hydroxychloroquine was one of the 4 potential treatments for COVID-19 that were being tested under WHO's Solidarity trial. See, under the Solidarity trial, the WHO has been trying to find a potential treatment for COVID-19, and 4 drugs, including remdesivir, lopinavir, ritonavir, interferon beta-1a, and hydroxychloroquine were being tested out. A few studies conducted in France and South Korea have shown that the administration of hydroxychloroquine can help reduce viral loads, and it can help control a hyperactive immune system. Some of these studies had indicated that hydroxychloroquine had prophylactic potential, meaning it can be used as a preventive drug against COVID-19. On this basis, India's Indian Council of Medical Research had recommended hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic treatment for frontline workers who are fighting against COVID-19. The ICMR had made it mandatory for frontline workers such as doctors, nurses, sanitation workers, and other healthcare workers to take hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic or preventive treatment. Recently, the Indian government had extended the usage of hydroxychloroquine as a prophylaxis for paramilitary and police personnel as well. Initially, when the pandemic began to spread, there was a lot of demand and interest shown for hydroxychloroquine around the world because of its inclusion in WHO's Solidarity trial and because of the interest shown by the medical and scientific community in hydroxychloroquine as a potential cure for COVID-19. In fact, the popularity of hydroxychloroquine rose even further after US President Donald Trump claimed it as a treatment for COVID-19. He even admitted that he himself had been taking hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic treatment. So as the global demand for hydroxychloroquine rose, India immediately placed a ban on the export of hydroxychloroquine because India happens to be one of the major producers. This decision of the Indian government to ban the export of hydroxychloroquine led global leaders such as Donald Trump and the Brazilian president to exert diplomatic pressure on India to lift the ban, and subsequently, India had allowed the export of hydroxychloroquine to a few select countries. But experts had always cautioned that the efficacy and safety of hydroxychloroquine had not been proven scientifically, and they even said that administering hydroxychloroquine could be potentially dangerous because of its side effects. Few studies conducted around the world have shown that hydroxychloroquine can cause cardiac arrhythmia and retinopathy, and it can have a serious impact on cardiac functioning. In some cases, it has also been noted to cause serious liver damage. So due to these concerns and doubts regarding the efficacy and safety of hydroxychloroquine, a number of experts and doctors were skeptical about administering hydroxychloroquine for COVID-19 patients and for frontline workers. In a sudden turn of events, a few days ago, the WHO placed a moratorium on the testing of hydroxychloroquine as a part of the Solidarity trials. The WHO decided to stop testing hydroxychloroquine as a part of these trials because it recognized the serious side effects of the drug. But this moratorium on testing placed by the WHO raised concerns about the administration of hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic in India. But the WHO has clarified that India can continue to use hydroxychloroquine as a preventive drug, but the moratorium on testing applies only for its usage as a treatment for COVID-19. Because studies conducted by the WHO and few other research organizations has shown that the usage of hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19 can have serious side effects. But its usage as a preventive drug or a prophylactic can be continued because in this case, studies have not shown any serious side effects, at least as of now. So in order to scientifically establish the efficacy and the safety of the drug, the WHO has called upon all the countries, including India, to rely upon RCTs or randomized clinical trials instead of relying upon observational studies. Because see, in an observational study, all the patients who are a part of the study group, they are administered with the drug, and hence the results of such a study can be biased and it could give misleading results. Because in an observational study, you do not have a control group to compare the results with. Whereas randomized clinical trials have been clearly recognized as the legitimate way of establishing the efficacy and safety of a drug. Because in RCTs, there are two groups that are used. We have an experimental group and a control group. Patients are divided into the experimental group and the control group at random, and only those in the experimental group receive the drug, whereas the control group members are either given a placebo or there is no intervention at all. Then the results of the two groups are compared in order to clearly establish the efficacy and safety of a drug. So the WHO has insisted that randomized controlled trials have to be conducted to establish the efficacy and safety of hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19. But until then, India and other countries can continue to use and test hydroxychloroquine as a prophylactic. Now let's take up a column from page number 7 in which the writer evaluates as to how India can become self-reliant in the field of science and technology and research and development. In the backdrop of the call for Atmanirbharata or self-reliance given by the Prime Minister, the writer says that India can become truly self-reliant in the field of science and tech and R&D only by making significant government reinvestment in PSUs and public funded research and development institutions. See, in the Nehruvian era, Indian R&D was largely driven by the public sector, especially in strategic core areas. And this public sector driven research and development placed India ahead of other developing countries between the 1950s and 1960s. This public sector driven R&D strategy of the Nehruvian era can be traced back to the Bombay Plan, which was proposed by top industrialists of Bombay in 1944 and 1945. A committee comprising of top industrialists and experts, including J.R.D. Tata, Mr. Birla, Dr. John Mathai, etc., they had proposed an economic plan which was later adopted by the Nehru government, driven by the spirit of socialism. Under the Bombay Plan, it had been proposed that in the core and strategic sectors, investments would be driven by the public sector, whereas in the non-core sectors, the private sector would be allowed to make investments with the support of the government. This strategy of the Bombay Plan initially helped India to make more public investments in R&D, and it helped Indian innovation to get ahead of other developing countries in the 1950s and 1960s. But India failed to capitalize on this advantage because India's public sector failed to modernize, especially in the 1970s and 1980s. The failure of Indian R&D to innovate, to modernize and to reform can again be traced back to the Bombay Plan itself. Because of the Bombay Plan, the private sector had established a monopoly in the non-core sectors, and it was more than content to maintain its monopoly in the non-core sectors, and hence the private sector was not interested in making any investments in research and development in the core sectors. And on the other hand, the public sector suffered because of lack of autonomy from the government, due to lack of modernization, and due to the unavailability of skilled manpower, which was a direct result of the inadequate investments that the government had made in mass education and healthcare. So due to the inherent deficiencies of the public sector and due to the lack of interest of the private sector in making investments in R&D, Indian innovation suffered in the 1970s and 1980s, and as a result, productivity and quality of the Indian industry took a major hit. So between 1970s and 1990s, India saw a period of low innovation, low productivity and low quality. As a direct consequence of this, India entirely missed out on the third industrial revolution. The third industrial revolution refers to the manufacturing of electronics, processors, semiconductor chips, computers, mobile phones, etc. And India lost out entirely on its initial advantage to other Asian economies due to its failure to make adequate investments in public sector institutions that were involved in research and development. Then came the era of liberalization, privatization and globalization, and India's focus shifted to buying readily available technology from the rest of the world, and this made India to be excessively reliant on external supplies, especially for critical technologies. The introduction of LPG reforms failed to reform our public sector units, and instead of making them self-reliant, it made them dependent on external suppliers, and as a result, indigenous research and development suffered. So post LPG reforms, we have seen that very few PSUs make investments in research and development. There are very few public research institutions that are innovating and developing newer indigenous technologies. On the other hand, LPG reforms has made the private sector to rely entirely upon the import of critical technologies. The introduction of LPG reforms did allow foreign companies to set foot in India and bring in much needed FDI, but their investments in R&D and innovation does not account for indigenization. So as a result of these flawed policies of the past, India's private sector has minimal investments in R&D. Whatever limited research and development is taking place, it is largely being done by public institutions, and the investments made by foreign corporations does not account for indigenization, and it just goes on to show the extent of India's external dependency with regard to critical technologies. If you compare this flawed model of India with the development model of other Asian countries, they set a very different example. Asian economies such as Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan and Singapore are today completely self-reliant with regard to critical technologies, because back in the 1970s and 1980s, these countries made sufficient investments in public sector-led research and development. Over the years, these economies have not only increased public investments in R&D, but they have also extended support to private research and development. So a combination of this has made these Asian economies to be completely self-reliant, and it has made them capable of relying upon indigenous technologies. Other Asian economies such as Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam and even Indonesia, they have followed a slightly different model which may not be suitable for India, because these countries did not aspire to establish themselves as an hub for research and development. Instead, they focused on establishing themselves as offshore manufacturing hubs. But the downside is that they have very low investments in indigenous R&D. This strategy might help in setting up a number of manufacturing facilities and create numerous livelihood opportunities, but it does not reduce their external dependency for critical technologies. In contrast, you will find that China has adopted a more hybrid model. In the 1970s and 80s, when India was lagging behind, China followed the approach of countries such as Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia to establish itself as a hub for low-end manufacturing. By late 1990s and early 2000, China had clearly established itself as a manufacturing powerhouse, and it had created numerous livelihood opportunities leading to tremendous growth. But of late, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, China has shifted its strategy and it has been making massive investments in research and development, especially in critical areas related to emerging technologies such as 5G, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, supercomputing, etc. So this places China in a comfortable position to lead the world towards fourth industrial revolution. But unfortunately, India again is found to be lagging behind. And the only way through which India can become self-reliant in these critical technologies and make a presence for itself in the fourth industrial revolution is by scaling up investments in public research and development. Currently, India's public investments in R&D stands at just 1% of India's GDP. So there is an urgent need to scale up India's public investments in R&D and focus these investments on public sector units and government-funded research institutions. Along with this, the government needs to extend financial support and policy support to India's private sector as well, in order to ensure that India's private sector also brings in its expertise to promote indigenization and self-reliance. Then finally, if India hopes to become self-reliant in these critical domains, then it needs a large base of skilled manpower, which can be created only by making adequate investments in mass education programs and healthcare schemes. Next, we have a few small articles which provide us a few important updates. According to this article on page number 10, India's COVID-19 recovery rate has improved from 26.59% to 41.61% in just a couple of weeks. Even as the number of COVID-19 cases are rising consistently, the substantial increase in recovery rate and the reduction in fatality rate offers some hope for India in its fight against the pandemic. Now let's take up another article from page number 10 related to the Aarogya Setu app. Over the last couple of months, we have discussed about the privacy concerns that have been raised by the Aarogya Setu app. In order to address these privacy concerns, the government has decided to open source the app by placing the source code of the app in the public domain. This is an important step from the government because if the source code is made public and if the app is made open source, then it will allow experts and professionals to examine the source code and identify any flaws in the design of the application, which could lead to the misuse of the app and the violation of the user's privacy. Along with publishing the source code in the public domain, the government has also announced a bug bounty program in order to reward those who are able to point out the bugs and the flaws in the source code. Now let's take up an article from page number 11 that refers to the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, which was announced as a part of the Government of India's economic stimulus package, which has been designed to overcome the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The specific details of the scheme has been announced by the Government of India, and under this Yojana, the government plans to increase fish production by 9% and double the income of fishermen and double India's export earnings through fisheries by the year 2024-25. But the disappointing fact is that the scheme does not provide for any immediate relief to the fisheries sector. Even though the central government and the state governments would be spending more than 20,000 crore rupees over the next 5 years under the scheme, it does not offer any immediate relief or any financial assistance to fishermen who have suffered losses during the lockdown. Next, we have an article on page number 15 which can be important for prelims. According to this article, Glenmark Pharmaceuticals has decided to conduct a randomized controlled trial that has been named as the FAITH trials in order to test out the efficacy and safety of two antiviral drugs to be used in combination as a treatment strategy for COVID-19. These two antiviral drugs are favipiravir and umifenovir, and the acronym FAITH trials stands for Favipiravir plus Umifenovir Efficacy and Safety Trial in Indian Hospital Setting. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. Which of the following regions fall under the very high hazard zone in the landslide hazard zonation of India? The options given are Himalayas, northeastern hill ranges, western Ghats and eastern Ghats. The correct answer is option B, 1 and 2 only. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 4, major landslides have been reported in Arunachal Pradesh and Assam as a result of heavy rains. So the topic of landslides gives us an opportunity to talk about India's vulnerability to landslides by looking at the hazard zonation map that has been developed by the NDMA. See, in India, landslides are reported in the Himalayas, in the northeastern hill ranges, in the western Ghats, and as well as in the eastern Ghats. But the most vulnerable region, which has been placed in the very high hazard category, has to be the Himalayan ranges and the northeastern hill ranges. The vulnerability of these two regions to landslides is extremely high because they are centered around an active tectonic plate. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Animal Welfare Board of India is a statutory advisory body established under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act of 1960. It was established in 1962 under the stewardship of Srimati Rukmini Devi Arundale, a noted Bharatnatyam dancer and an animal rights activist. Its headquarters was recently shifted from Chennai to Balabgarh in Haryana. All the three given statements are correct, so option D is the right answer. This question was asked because we have an article on page number 5 which makes a reference to the Animal Welfare Board of India. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Char Dham highway project connects 4 pilgrimage sites in Uttarakhand, which includes Gangotri, Kedarnath, Yamunotri and Badrinath. The project involves the construction of tunnels in complex terrain and is being executed by the Ministry of Culture. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect, so option A is the right answer. See, this project is not being executed by the Ministry of Culture, but it is being executed by the Border Roads Organization, which falls under the Ministry of Defense. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 9, a major milestone has been achieved by the BRO with regard to the construction of tunnels as a part of the Char Dham highway project. But please remember, this refers to the Char Dham Yatra in Uttarakhand, which is also referred to as the Chota Char Dham. It is an annual pilgrimage that covers 4 sacred pilgrimage sites in Uttarakhand that includes Gangotri, Yamunotri, Kedarnath and Badrinath. The other Char Dham Yatra that is spread across India includes 4 pilgrimage sites located at Badrinath, Puri, Rameshwaram and Dwarka. Now let's take up the next practice question. The terms demilitarized zone, 38th parallel and joint security area are used in reference to the border between North Korea and South Korea. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 14, the United Nations Command that is responsible for overseeing the affairs at the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea has said that the ceasefire established by the Armistice Agreement was recently violated by both North Korea and South Korea. The United Nations Command is led by the United States and it is responsible for overseeing the affairs at the DMZ. See, this demilitarized zone marks the ceasefire line between North Korea and South Korea. It passes along the 38th parallel north latitude, which used to serve as the de facto border between the two Koreas before the Korean War. And along the demilitarized zone, there is a joint security area which provides for a common meeting point between officials of North Korea and South Korea. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The establishment of the Financial Stability and Development Council as an apex level super regulatory body was first proposed by the Urjit Patel Committee. It is a statutory body. It is chaired by the Governor of RBI. All the three statements are incorrect, so option D is the right answer. See, the FSDC was established in 2010 based on the recommendations of the Raghuram Rajan Committee. This council has been established as an apex level super regulatory body in order to oversee the macroeconomic stability of the Indian economy in the aftermath of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. It is not a statutory body and it has been established through a government resolution. This council is chaired by the Union Finance Minister and it includes the Governor of the RBI, key secretaries from the Ministry of Finance and other key ministries, and it also includes the chairmen of regulatory agencies such as SEBI, IRDA, PFRDA, etc. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 15, Union Finance Minister has called for a FSDC meeting in order to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on India's macroeconomic stability. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2016 prelims paper. Regarding DigiLocker, sometimes seen in the news, Which of the following statements are correct? It is a digital locker system offered by the government under the Digital India program. It allows you to access your e-documents irrespective of your physical location. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, hydroxychloroquine has been gaining a lot of attention during the COVID-19 pandemic. Discuss the issue in detail. The second question, for India to become self-reliant, there needs to be significant government reinvestment in the public sector undertakings and research and development. Critically evaluate. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.